They tore my house down on a Tuesday. September 14th, I was in Huntsville Hospital recovering from emergency cardiac surgery, and while I was lying in a bed with tubes in my chest and my daughter holding my hand, Victor Slade authorized a demolition crew to pull down the house I built with my own hands, the house I framed, the house I wired, the house I put every joint and beam and ridgeboard into over 14 months of evenings and weekends. Gone. Not condemned by the city, not ordered by a court, authorized by a homeowners association board president who told my neighbor the structure was a safety hazard and a blight on the community. I want to tell you this story. All of it. Because what Victor Slade did was not just destruction, it was theft. Calculated, documented, premeditated theft. And I need you to stay with me through the part where I almost did not survive. Because that is where this story begins to turn. If someone tore down what you built while you were in a hospital bed, I need to know what you would have done. Tell me in the comments, because for a while, I did not know what I was going to do either. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Darnell Briggs. I am 64 years old. I was born in Decatur, Alabama, and I grew up watching my father build things, not figuratively, literally. My father, James Briggs, was a Finnish carpenter who spent 31 years working construction in the Tennessee Valley. He could look at a raw piece of lumber and tell you its grain, its moisture content, whether it would hold a nail or split under stress. He taught me the same. By the time I was 17, I was framing walls on weekends. By 22, I had my general contractor's license. By 30, I had built or substantially renovated 47 homes in North Alabama. I want you to understand what that means. A general contractor does not just swing a hammer. A GC reads plans, pulls permits, manages subcontractors, signs off on inspections, understands municipal code, interprets zoning ordinances, and knows the difference between what is written and what is enforceable. I have dealt with city inspectors, county assessors, building departments, and zoning boards for almost 4 decades. I know how structures are approved, how violations are cited, how condemnation proceedings work, and what the legal threshold is for demolishing a residential structure. I know it because I have lived inside that system my entire working life. That knowledge is what Victor Slade did not account for when he decided I was just a sick old man who would not know what hit him. I retired in 2020, 38 years of doing it right. I sold my contracting company to a younger man, took my pension and my savings, and moved to a new development on the southeast edge of Huntsville, a planned community called Ridgemont Estates. My wife, Patricia, had picked the neighborhood. She wanted a quiet street, good schools nearby for the grandchildren when they visited, a community pool, a little HOA that kept the lawns tidy, nothing complicated. I did not buy a house at Ridgemont. I bought a lot, Lot 44, Ridgemont Estates, Phase 2. 0.38 acres at the end of a cul-de-sac, and I built on it. I filed every permit. I submitted every plan to the Huntsville-Madison County Planning Department for approval. I submitted architectural drawings to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee 3 months before I broke ground. They approved the design in writing on March 8, 2021. I have that approval letter. I want you to remember it. It comes back. My father's tool belt hung on a peg in the garage from the day I started framing. It is old leather, dark brown, scarred at the buckle from decades of his hands. He gave it to me the year he retired, and I wore it the whole time I built that house. It was the one piece of sentimentality I allowed myself. I am not a sentimental man. But that belt mattered. I built that house over 14 months. My son Marcus helped on weekends. My brother-in-law Eugene did the tile. A friend from the old days, Roy Givens, who has been doing HVAC work since 1988, handled the mechanical systems. It was not just a house, it was a project that had every person I loved in it. By August of 2022, the home was finished. 2,400 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a covered rear porch I designed myself with exposed timber rafters. The city issued a certificate of occupancy on August 19, 2022. I moved in the first weekend of September. The neighborhood was fine, pleasant mostly, yards well kept, people waved. The HOA dues were $185 a month, which covered the pool, the entrance landscaping, and a small reserve fund for road maintenance. I went to one board meeting, met the officers, and thought nothing of it. Victor Slade introduced himself at that first meeting. He was the HOA president. 51 years old, heavy build, always dressed like he had just come from somewhere important. Button-down shirts, nice watch, that particular kind of confidence that comes from a man who has rarely been told no. He shook my hand and said he had seen the work going up on my lot and it looked sharp. He was pleasant. I had no reason to think otherwise. But here's the thing. Victor Slade was not just an HOA president. He was a real estate developer who had built 4 of the homes in Phase 2 of Ridgemont Estates, including the 3 lots directly adjacent to mine. He had his company, Slade Development LLC, registered as having developed parcels 40 through 43 in the Ridgemont Plat. His company had also built the original Phase 1 amenity center. That is a conflict of interest the size of a barn door, and no one on that board had ever raised it. I want you to remember that detail too. It matters more than you can imagine right now. The first notice came in January of 2023, 4 months after I moved in. I was drinking coffee on a Sunday morning when I saw the envelope in my mailbox with the HOA's letterhead. I opened it expecting, a reminder about garbage bin placement or something routine. What I found was a citation. The HOA Architectural Review Committee was citing my rear-covered porch as a non-approved structure requiring immediate modification or removal. The fine was $500 with $50 per day accruing until the violation was resolved. I read it twice. Then I went and pulled the approval letter from my files. The one dated March 8, 2021. The one signed by Gerald Hopper, who had been the ARC chairman at the time. The letter specifically approved the covered rear porch with exposed timber rafters, dimensions, materials, finish specifications, all of it, approved, in writing, with a signature. I called the HOA management company the next morning. I spoke to a woman named Lori, and I read her the approval letter verbatim. She said she would pass it along. 2 weeks later, a second notice arrived. Fine now at $200. I sent a certified letter with a copy of the approval letter enclosed. I have the return receipt from that mailing. I got a third notice in March. Fine now at $3,700. That was when I knew this was not an administrative error. I drove to the HOA board meeting in April. Victor Slade ran the meeting. When I stood up and presented my case, the approval letter, the certified letter, the return receipts, he looked at me with a patience that was designed to feel like condescension. He said, "Mr. Briggs, the prior ARC chairman approved that structure informally, but it was never entered into the official record. As far as our current documentation shows, that porch is unapproved." I said, "I have the letter." He said, "Sir, you clearly don't understand how development works. A letter from a volunteer committee member does not constitute formal architectural approval. Our CC&Rs require board ratification. There was no board vote." He said it in front of 12 neighbors and 2 board members, calm, certain, like he was explaining something to a child. What he did not know, could not know, was that I had spent the better part of 4 decades sitting in rooms with city officials who tried the same thing. I know the difference between a procedural argument and a legal one. And I knew, standing in that room, that he was making a procedural argument designed to look like a legal one. I sat back down. I did not argue. I wrote down what he said word for word. That is what 40 years in construction teaches you. You do not argue at the job site. You document and you resolve it properly, or you resolve it in court. The fine was now at $5,200 when I had my heart attack in late August of 2023. I want to be precise about the timeline because it matters. On August 29th, I went to the emergency room with chest pain. The cardiologist determined I had a 90% blockage in my left anterior descending artery. They performed open heart surgery the next morning, a triple bypass. I was in the ICU for 4 days and in the hospital for 11 total. My daughter Keisha stayed with me the entire time. I was not home. I was not reachable. My phone was on a table in a hospital room, and my primary concern was breathing. Victor Slade's demolition crew arrived on September 14, 2023, day 16 of my hospitalization. They documented their presence with a notice taped to the front door, a door no one was home to answer, citing an emergency demolition order issued under the HOA's authority to abate safety hazards. They removed the rear covered porch. They did it in 4 hours. My son Marcus called me. He had gone by the house to water my plants and check on things. He said, "Dad, the porch is gone." I thought he was confused. I said, "What do you mean it's gone?" He said, "There's nothing there, just the slab, and a notice on the door." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. I have thought about how to describe it many times. It was not rage, not immediately. It was a very particular kind of grief, the kind that comes from something being taken that you made with your own hands. That porch had timber rafters I cut and notched myself. My son had helped me set the ridge beam. It was the last thing I built before my body decided to remind me I was 63 years old. And it was gone. Keisha asked me if I was okay. I told her yes. My blood pressure told a different story, and the nurse came in to check on the monitors. But here's what I did not know yet. Victor Slade had made a mistake, several of them, and they were all on paper. Have you ever had someone take something from you and assume that because you are diminished, sick, tired, overwhelmed, you would not have the capacity to come back, that you would absorb it and walk away? Because that is what he thought. I know it now. I know it from what came out later. Drop a comment if that has happened to you. I want to hear it. I was home by September 20th, weak, slow, on 4 different medications. My doctor told me to rest. My daughter told me to let it go. My brother-in-law Eugene drove me to my house, and I stood in the backyard looking at the slab where my porch used to be. My father's tool belt was still on its peg in the garage. I went in and touched it. I almost let it go. I want to be honest about that. There was a Tuesday night about a week after I got home where I sat in my kitchen at 10 o'clock, and I thought seriously about calling a lawyer and saying, "Find out what the settlement looks like." I was tired in a way I had not been tired before. My chest hurt. My hands shook slightly from the medication, and the idea of fighting felt like something I did not have left in me. But I kept coming back to one thing. Victor Slade had authorized the demolition of a structure on my private property, a legally permitted certificate of occupancy bearing structure, without a court order, without a condemnation proceeding, without a municipal citation from the city of Huntsville. He had done it under the HOA's internal emergency abatement authority. And I knew from 38 years of pulling permits and reading municipal code that authority had a ceiling. You do not demolish a permitted residential structure in the state of Alabama without judicial review. You do not. I did not sleep that night. But by morning, I knew what I was doing. I called Cheryl Odom at 7:30 in the morning. Cheryl and I have known each other for 20 years. She did the title work on a half-dozen projects I built over the years. She is a real estate attorney based in Huntsville, small practice, 8 years on the Madison County Bar Association, and the sharpest reader of property documents I have ever met. She has a habit of tapping her pen against her legal pad 3 times when she finds something worth noting. By the time I finished talking that morning, I had heard her tap it 11 times. She came to my house 2 days later. We sat at my kitchen table, and I laid out everything I had. The approval letter from March 2021, the certified mailings, the HOA notices, the fine history totaling $9,800 at the time of demolition, the demolition notice they had left on my door, and the certificate of occupancy from the city of Huntsville. Cheryl read through everything slowly. When she finished, she tapped her pen 3 times and looked up. "Darnell," she said, "they demolished a structure that had a valid city certificate of occupancy. Do you understand what that means?" I did, but I let her explain it for the record. Here is the knowledge nugget I need you to hear, and please, if you own property in an HOA, write this down. A certificate of occupancy issued by a municipal authority is a legal document certifying that a structure meets building code and is approved for use. An HOA is a private contractual organization. Their CC&Rs, their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, govern aesthetic and community standards. They do not supersede the municipal permitting authority. They cannot supersede it. An HOA does not have the legal authority to demolish a structure that a city has permitted and certified unless they have obtained a court order or the structure poses an immediate life safety emergency as defined by law, not by the HOA president's opinion. What Victor Slade did was not HOA enforcement. It was destruction of private property. Cheryl filed a complaint with the Madison County Circuit Court in October 2023. The cause of action: wrongful demolition, conversion of real property, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit named Victor Slade individually and in his capacity as HOA president, Slade Development LLC, and the Ridgemont Estates HOA. The claimed damages were $87,000. The assessed replacement cost of the demolished structure, plus legal fees and consequential damages from the emotional distress of receiving the news while recovering from open-heart surgery. The hearing date was set for February 16, 2024. That gave us 4 months. But that was not the worst part, because what Cheryl found when she started pulling records was something I had not seen coming. I want you to understand what we were looking at. A court date in 4 months. A man with a development company and 3 attorneys on retainer. And then Cheryl called me on a Wednesday afternoon in November and said, "Darnell, I need you to come in. Bring your original deed." When I got to her office, she had a legal pad with 3 columns of notes and her pen going steadily. She had done something I had not thought to do. She had pulled the plat for Ridgemont Estates Phase 2, the actual recorded plat from the Madison County Probate Court, and compared it against the Homeowners Association's recorded CC&Rs and the deed restrictions. She had also pulled the architectural approval records filed with the HOA management company. The original ARC approval letter, the one Gerald Hopper signed on March 8, 2021, was not in the HOA's files. It had been removed. Gerald Hopper, the prior ARC chairman, had resigned from the board in late 2021 after a disagreement with Victor Slade about a proposed amendment to the CC&Rs. Cheryl contacted Gerald directly. He remembered signing my approval. He still had a copy in his own records at home because he kept everything. That was the first thing. Gerald Hopper walking in with his own copy of the letter I had already produced. The second thing was what Cheryl found in the HOA's financial records, which she had subpoenaed as part of the discovery process. Victor Slade's company, Slade Development LLC, had been paid $14,200 by the Ridgemont Estates HOA in 2022 and another $11,800 in 2023 for landscaping and common area maintenance services. There was no competitive bid process. There was no board vote on the contracts. The payments had been authorized by Victor Slade himself as HOA president to his own development company. That is self-dealing. In the state of Alabama, a board member of a nonprofit homeowners association who authorizes payments to their own company without disclosure and without member vote is potentially in violation of both the HOA's own governing documents and state nonprofit corporation law. Cheryl tapped her pen 3 times and said, "He's been running this association like a slush fund." That night, I sat in my car in Cheryl's parking lot for a long time and did not start the engine. I was thinking about the 11 other homes Victor Slade's company had sold in Phase 2, about the families who lived in them, about whether any of them knew what their HOA dues were actually paying for. And then, 3 weeks before the February hearing, Victor Slade's attorneys filed an emergency motion to dismiss. Their argument was that my porch had violated the CC&R's setback requirements, specifically that the structure had been built within 12 feet of the rear property line rather than the required 15 feet. They produced a survey they claimed showed the encroachment. It was dated November 2023, 2 months after the demolition, a survey conducted after the structure was already demolished. Think about that. They destroyed the structure, and then they hired a surveyor to tell me why they had been right to destroy it. Cheryl filed the motion response within a week. She included Gerald Hopper's original approval letter. She included the city-issued building permit, which had been reviewed and approved by the city's own inspectors, who check setbacks. She included the certificate of occupancy. She included the March 2021 ARC approval letter that described, in specific terms, the porch's dimensions and placement on the lot. And she attached the financial records showing $26,000 in undisclosed self-dealing payments from the HOA to Slade Development. The night before the hearing, Victor Slade's attorney called Cheryl and offered a settlement, $40,000 and a mutual release of all claims. Cheryl called me. I said no. She said, "Are you sure? That covers the structure plus some." I said, He demolished my house while I was in surgery. And he's been stealing from this neighborhood for 2 years. $40,000 does not cover that." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Okay." We walked into that courtroom on February 16th, 2024. I wore the same clothes I wear to every important meeting I've ever attended. Dark slacks, a white shirt, my good shoes. Victor Slade was at the opposite table in a gray suit with 2 attorneys beside him. He looked composed. He'd probably been in courtrooms before. Probably figured the judge would see 2 parties with a property dispute and nudge them toward settlement. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Good Washington. She'd been on the Madison County Circuit Court for 11 years. She had also, as Cheryl noted quietly to me before proceedings began, written a law review article in 2017 on HOA overreach and the limits of private covenant authority. I did not know that going in. Victor Slade apparently did not either. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Judge Good Washington was methodical and precise. She asked Slade's attorneys specific questions about the legal basis for the demolition authority. They cited the HOA's CC&Rs, Section 14, which allowed the board to abate nuisances and hazardous conditions upon reasonable notice. The judge asked them to define reasonable notice. They said the notice posted on my door constituted reasonable notice. She asked them to document the life safety emergency that had triggered the emergency abatement provision. They cited the ARC's determination that the structure was non-compliant. She asked them to produce the original complaint filed with the city of Huntsville, declaring the structure hazardous. There was no such complaint. She asked them to produce the engineering report or inspection that had classified the structure as hazardous. There was no such report. Cheryl presented Gerald Hopper, who testified in person. She presented the city permits and the certificate of occupancy. She presented the financial records. She presented the November 2023 survey and noted on the record that it had been commissioned after the structure's demolition. Victor Slade took the stand. His composure started fracturing about 20 minutes in when Cheryl began asking him about the payments to his LLC. His voice got careful in a way that careful voices get when a man is calculating what he can say without committing perjury. I watched his hands on the table. They were still. Too still. A man maintaining. And then Cheryl asked him one question I had not heard in preparation. She asked him to name the other homeowners who had received citations under Section 14's emergency abatement provision in the previous 3 years. He said he did not have that information available. She handed him a document, his own board's records. 12 citations issued under Section 14 in 3 years. All 12 were on lots in Phase 2, the section Victor Slade's company had developed. Not one citation in Phase 1. Every citation had targeted a homeowner who had declined to use Slade development for renovation or expansion work. That was the pattern. That was the weapon. The Section 14 Emergency Abatement Clause was not being used to protect community safety. It was being used to pressure homeowners who didn't bring their business to the HOA president's company. And when they didn't comply, it escalated. In my case, it escalated to demolition. I watched his face when Cheryl laid that document in front of him. The color went out of it, not dramatically, not like in a movie, just a slow draining, like a man who had spent years assuming no one was watching, suddenly aware that someone had been watching the whole time. Judge Good Washington issued her ruling from the bench. She found that the Ridgemont Estates HOA had acted outside its authority under both its own CC&Rs and Alabama property law when it authorized the demolition of a permitted certificated residential structure without judicial authorization and without a legitimate life safety determination. She found the November 2023 survey inadmissible as post facto justification for a completed act of destruction. She found that Victor Slade, in his individual capacity, had authorized the demolition willfully and with knowledge that it lacked legal basis. She awarded damages of $94,500, the $87,000 claimed replacement cost, plus $7,500 in additional compensatory damages for distress. She referred the financial self-dealing findings to the Alabama Attorney General's office for potential investigation into nonprofit fraud. Victor Slade was removed from the HOA board effective immediately by court order. His LLC was permanently barred from contracting with Ridgemont Estates HOA. He was walked out by his attorneys without looking at me once. I did not look for him either. I sat there steady. That was all. I want to tell you about a moment that happened 2 days after the ruling. It is the moment that actually settled something for me. I drove to a home improvement store, bought lumber, pine mostly with some oak for the rafter tails. I came home, unloaded it in the backyard, and just stood there looking at the slab. My father's tool belt was on its peg in the garage. I went in and put it on. It fit the same way it always fit, heavy at the hips, solid. I picked up a pencil and started marking measurements on the first board. I did not rebuild the whole porch that day. That took another 3 months. But I started it. That afternoon, in the quiet of my own yard. That is where it ended for me, not in the courtroom. In the silence of that backyard, with a pencil and a board and 40 years of knowing how to do this right. Here is what I want to leave you with. Know your approvals. Not just that you received them. Know what they say, who signed them, and keep your own copy independent of the HOA's files. An approval letter filed only with the association is a letter that can disappear. A copy in your own records with a certified mailing receipt is evidence. The difference between those two things, in my case, was the whole case. Know your CC&Rs. Read Section 14 of whatever governing document your HOA operates under, the emergency abatement section, the self-help provision, whatever it is called. Understand what authority they are actually claiming. An HOA can enforce aesthetic standards. They cannot demolish legally permitted structures without a court order. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are either wrong or lying. Get an attorney before you let them get in front of a judge unchallenged. And this, know who is on your board and know what business interests they have in the community. In the state of Alabama and in most states, a board member who awards contracts to their own company without disclosure is breaking the law. It is not a gray area. Get the financial records. They are available to members under most HOA governing documents. If your board resists producing them, that resistance is itself information. My name is Darnell Briggs. I am 64 years old. I still live on Lot 44 in Ridgemont Estates, right here in Huntsville, Alabama. I have a covered rear porch with exposed timber rafters, a slab that remembers what was done to it, and a leather tool belt on a peg in my garage that my father wore for 31 years before he gave it to me. I built this house. I'm still in it, and I'm not going anywhere. If you are in a fight right now, with an HOA board, with a developer, with someone who is using power they do not legally have to push you out of what you own, drop your story in the comments. I read every one. The wildest story gets a full response from me personally. You are not alone in this. And if this story meant something to you, pass it on. There is someone in your life right now living a version of this and thinking no one would believe them. Show them.